The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the presidential palace in Ouagadougou as Ibrahim Traoré sipped his traditional tea, reviewing reports from rural development projects. An encrypted message buzzed on his phone that would change everything. The sender was unexpected: the World Economic Forum, extending a last-minute invitation to participate in a live international summit. 3 former American presidents would be present, including Donald Trump, to discuss global leadership and economic partnerships. Traoré's chief of staff burst into the room, a printed copy of the same message in her hand. "Mr. President, they want you on the panel in 48 hours, she said, her voice a mix of excitement and concern. The invitation felt like a trap disguised as an opportunity. Tro set down his cup and walked to the window, overlooking the bustling streets of his capital. Vendors called out their wares while children played between the market stalls, their laughter mixing with the honking of motorcycles. This was the Africa he fought for: vibrant, independent, and unapologetically authentic. Since his rise to power, the international community had largely ignored Burkina Faso, dismissing him as just another young African leader who would eventually conform. But this invitation suggested something different. Perhaps it was a recognition of his growing influence across the continent. His advisors had warned him about such moments, when the global elite would try to co-opt or embarrass rising African voices. Yet Tro sensed this could be his platform to speak truths that needed hearing. The summit details were deliberately vague, labeled simply as global leadership in times of change. Mr. Traoré knew from experience that such generic titles often masked more specific agendas. His intelligence team had already begun researching the other participants, their recent statements, and possible discussion topics. The format would be a live, unscripted roundtable broadcast to millions worldwide, with questions from moderators and international audiences. No prepared speeches, no diplomatic safety nets, just raw, real-time dialogue between world leaders. For someone who had built his reputation on authentic communication with his people, this felt like familiar territory. The irony wasn't lost on him that they wanted him to discuss leadership alongside politicians he considered symbols of the very system he opposed. As evening approached, Traoré called an emergency meeting with his closest advisors in the secure conference room. Maps of Africa covered the walls alongside photos of ordinary Burkinabe citizens whose lives had been transformed by recent policies. "They think they're inviting a puppet to dance for their cameras," he said, his voice calm but determined. His foreign minister warned about the risks of appearing alongside controversial figures, especially Trump, whose history of disparaging remarks about Africa was well documented. But Traoré's mind was already made up. This wasn't just an invitation. It was a chance to shatter stereotypes on the world's biggest stage. He would go not as a supplicant seeking validation, but as a sovereign leader ready to defend his continent's dignity with wit, wisdom, and unwavering truth. The presidential strategy room in Ouagadougou buzzed with intense energy as Traoré's team worked through the night, preparing for what they knew would be more than a diplomatic encounter. Foreign Minister Olivier Rua spread documents across the mahogany table, each file containing damning statistics about Western interference in African affairs. "If Trump mentions aid or development, we hit him with these numbers," she said, pointing to data showing how European and American corporations extracted more wealth from Africa than they ever contributed. Traoré's communications director, a brilliant young woman named Aminata, pulled up social media analytics showing Trump's previous disparaging comments about African nations. The room felt like a war room because, in many ways, that's exactly what it was. They weren't just preparing talking points. They were crafting weapons of truth that could cut through decades of condescending narratives. Each fact, each statistic, each historical reference was chosen for maximum impact. The president himself sat quietly in the corner, absorbing every detail while mentally rehearsing his approach. He had learned from his grandmother that the most powerful warriors were those who could disarm opponents with wisdom before they even realized a battle had begun. His style had always been conversational, yet devastating, using humor and facts to expose hypocrisy without raising his voice. "Remember," he told his team, "we're not going there to argue with a former American president. We're going there to speak to the millions of young Africans who will be watching, to show them what dignified resistance looks like." His chief of staff nodded, understanding that this moment transcended personal politics. It was about continental pride. They spent hours role-playing different scenarios, with advisors taking turns playing Trump, each trying to anticipate his likely provocations. Traoré remained unflappable, responding to each mock attack with surgical precision and unexpected levity. As dawn broke over the capital, Tro walked alone through the palace gardens where his predecessors had once entertained colonial administrators. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on him. In less than 24 hours, he would sit across from representatives of the same powers his ancestors had served. But times had changed, and so had Africa's willingness to accept condescension disguised as partnership. His phone buzzed with messages of support from fellow African leaders from Dakar to Nairobi, all recognizing the symbolic importance of this encounter. Julius Malema had sent a simple text, "Show them who we are, brother." Even traditional rivals were united in their hope that Traoré would seize this moment effectively. The weight of continental expectations settled on his shoulders, but instead of pressure, he felt purpose. The final briefing session took place in his private office with only his most trusted advisors present. Rua handed him a leather folder containing key talking points, but Traoré set it aside without opening it. "I won't need these," he said with a slight smile that his team had learned to recognize as dangerous for his opponents. Trump thinks he's dealing with just another African leader who will be intimidated by his presence. He doesn't understand that we've been preparing for this conversation our entire lives. The room fell silent as the gravity of the moment settled in. This wasn't about winning a debate. It was about redefining how the world saw African leadership. Traoré stood and straightened his traditional woven shirt, a deliberate choice that would send its own message on the global stage. Tomorrow, the world would witness something unprecedented. The Geneva studios of Global News Network hummed with nervous energy as technicians made final adjustments to the circular table where history would unfold. Massive cameras positioned at strategic angles captured every nuance of the pristine set, while producers whispered urgently into their headsets about audience numbers already breaking records. The lighting was deliberately dramatic, casting sharp shadows that would emphasize every facial expression and gesture during the live broadcast. International journalists packed the observation gallery, their cameras clicking incessantly as they documented the pre-show tension. Security personnel moved with military precision, their earpieces crackling with constant updates about the high-profile arrivals expected momentarily. The air conditioning worked overtime, but couldn't quite dispel the electric atmosphere of anticipation. Even seasoned broadcast veterans admitted they'd never felt energy quite like this before a political roundtable. Trump arrived first, his entourage filling the green room with familiar chaos as aides briefed him on talking points while others managed his social media accounts. His confidence was palpable as he adjusted his signature red tie and practiced his opening remarks in the mirror. "This should be easy," he told his chief strategist, dismissing concerns about the other participants with characteristic bravado. The former president had built his reputation on dominating such encounters, using his larger-than-life personality to overwhelm opponents before they could find their footing. His team had prepared standard talking points about American leadership and global partnerships, expecting a routine performance.